Hey guys, tonight we slip into the grimy, tangled world of medieval hairstyles, where your scalp was more battlefield than beauty salon. Picture yourself in a muddy village square, 1100 AD, surrounded by peasants scratching at lice-infested locks, while a noblewoman's towering headdress wobbles nearby, hiding who knows what underneath. The air smells of damp wool, stale bread, and something suspiciously like unwashed hair. In this era, your hairstyle wasn't just a choice. It was a survival tactic, a status symbol, and sometimes a one-way ticket to a witch's pyre. One wrong snip, and you probably won't survive this, at least not with your dignity intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know where you're chilling as we dive in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a medieval world where hair is a nightmare. Forget shampoo commercials with glossy waves. Here, your hair is a matted, itchy mess, and you're lucky if it's not crawling with critters. Lice are so common that scratching your scalp is as routine as breathing. Historical records, like those from 13th century England, show monasteries stocking up on combs not for style but for pest control. Monks literally combed each other's heads during downtime. Your average peasant, trudging through fields, has hair clumped with dirt and sweat, maybe tied back with a strip of cloth if they're lucky. Nobles aren't much better off. Their elaborate braids and curls are often pinned under heavy veils or crowns to mask the chaos beneath. Hygiene. Barely a concept. Bathing is rare, and hair washing might mean a quick rinse in a stream, if you're near one. But let's get to the quirky stuff. Ever heard of using cow dung as a hair treatment? Yeah, some medieval folk swore by it, smearing it on to strengthen their locks. No evidence it worked, but it sure made you grateful for any hat within reach. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or just a bizarre local fad in places like rural France. Either way, you're gagging at the thought as you stand there, surrounded by villagers who smell like a barnyard. The lack of sanitation isn't just gross, it's a status marker. If you're poor, your hair is a wild tangle, maybe hacked short with a dull knife to keep it manageable. If you're rich, you've got servants to braid it into submission, but it's still a lice haven under those velvet caps. You're noticing the social rules now. Hair length, style, and coverage scream your place in the pecking order. Long hair on men, fine for young nobles, but peasants keep it short, lest to grab in a brawl. Women's hair is trickier. Unmarried girls might flaunt loose waves, but once you're wed, you're stuffing your hair under a wimple or veil, thanks to church edicts about modesty. And don't even think about showing too much hair in public. You might as well paint "sinner" on your forehead. You're itching just watching a merchant's wife struggle to pin her hair under a linen coif, her fingers fumbling with bone pins that keep slipping out. Joke's on her, those pins are probably hosting their own lice party. Let's talk tools, because you're not getting a sleek blowout here. Combs are your best friend, usually carved from wood or bone, with teeth so coarse they snag more than they smooth. If you're fancy, maybe you've got an ivory comb, but it's still a torture device. Brushes barely exist. You're detangling with your fingers or begging a friend to help, which is as much a social ritual as a grooming one. In villages, you see women sitting in circles, picking through each other's hair like monkeys, bonding over shared misery. It's not cute, it's survival. And if your hair's too far gone, you're grabbing a knife and chopping it off, hoping you don't nick your scalp. Blood poisoning's a real mood killer. You're starting to see why hats are a medieval must-have. Straw hats, cloth caps, ornate headdresses, they're not just fashion, they're camouflage for your hair disasters. A peasant's hood hides the grease. A noble's jeweled caul distracts from the tangles. Even kids aren't spared. You spot a grubby child with a bowl cut so crooked it looks like it was done in the dark. Spoiler, it probably was. Parents hack away with whatever blade's handy, and symmetry isn't exactly a priority. You're chuckling at the thought of a medieval barber staring at that kid's head, muttering, close enough. But deep down, you're grateful for your own baseball cap back home. The seasons don't help. Summer means sweat-soaked hair sticking to your neck, breeding more lice. Winter, your scalp's dry as parchment, flaking under your hood. You're dreaming of modern shampoo, but here, you're stuck with herbal rinses, if you're lucky. Some folks boil rosemary or nettles, thinking it'll clean their hair. Spoiler, it doesn't. You're just adding plant juice to the grime. And don't get me started on the smell. Between the dung treatments, unwashed scalps, and the occasional splash of ale used as a cleanser, you're wondering how anyone stood close enough to braid each other's hair without passing out. Yet somehow they did. You're impressed, horrified, and itching all at once. As you wander this medieval mess, you're noticing how hair shapes identity. A knight's close-cropped head says he's ready for battle. A lady's veiled braids scream, I'm respectable. But it's not just about looks, it's about power. Control your hair, and you control your image. Lose that control, and you're a walking scandal. You're already dreading the next village, where rumors of witchy loose hair might get you in trouble. For now, you're just glad you've got a hood to pull over your own tangled mess. Hats, man. They're the real MVPs. You're now mingling with medieval royalty, where hair is less about hygiene and more about flexing power, but trust me, it's still a disaster under those crowns. You're standing in a drafty castle hall, the air thick with the scent of beeswax candles and slightly sour perfume. Kings and queens strut past, their heads topped with gold circlets or velvet caps, but beneath the bling, their hair is a greasy, matted nightmare begging for a hat's mercy. You're catching glimpses of their scalps, red, itchy, and probably hosting a lice convention. Royalty might have better combs, but they're not immune to the grime of an era where baths are a twice-a-year luxury. Let's set the scene. You're eyeing a king, maybe someone like Henry II of England, whose historical portraits show a neatly trimmed beard but say nothing about his hair. Chronicles from the 12th century hint that even royals dealt with lice, with court records mentioning delousing as a job for low-ranking servants. These kings and queens rely on elaborate headgear to distract from the chaos underneath. You're watching a queen's ladies-in-waiting pin her hair into a coiled masterpiece, only to smother it under a jeweled headdress so heavy it makes your neck ache just looking at it. The headdress isn't just fashion, it's a lifesaver, hiding the fact that her hair hasn't been washed since last Easter. Here's the quirky bit. Some royals, especially in France, allegedly used pigeon droppings mixed with wine as a hair conditioner. Yeah, you're wrinkling your nose, and honestly, same. No records confirm it worked, but the logic was that the acid in the droppings might strip grease. Spoiler, it probably just made their hair smell like a birdcage. Historians still argue whether this was a courtly trend or just a wild rumor spread by snarky chroniclers. Either way, you're thanking your lucky stars for that gilded crown covering the evidence. You're noticing the royal hair game is all about illusion. Men's hair is kept short, practical for fitting under helmets or crowns, but it's still a mess of oil and dirt. Kings like Richard the Lionheart favored a close crop, partly for battle, partly to avoid looking like a peasant with a shaggy mop. Women have it worse. Long hair is a status symbol, proof you don't toil in fields, but it's a pain to maintain. You're watching a noblewoman's maid struggle with a bone comb, yanking through knots while the lady grimaces. The goal: braids so tight they could double as armor, then tucked under a wimple or barbette to scream, "I'm rich and pious." But the reality? Those braids are a lice hotel, and everyone's pretending not to notice. Let's talk headgear, because you're starting to see why it's the real star. Crowns, coronets, and velvet caps aren't just for show, they're camouflage. A king's crown sits heavy, pressing his greasy locks flat, while a queen's conical hennin, that pointy princess hat you're picturing, hides hair that's been pinned and prodded into submission. You're chuckling at the thought of a royal page whispering, "Sire, your lice are showing," but it's not far off. These headpieces are engineering marvels, often stuffed with horsehair or linen to add volume, making the wearer look regal while covering the horror show beneath. Joke's on them, those padded caps are probably crawling with bugs too. The social stakes are high. You're noticing how hair signals rank even among the elite. A king's neatly trimmed beard says authority, a queen's veiled hair screams virtue. But mess up the look, you're toast. A noblewoman caught with loose, unkempt hair might as well announce she's fallen from grace. You're imagining the court gossip. Did you see Lady Eleanor's hair? Practically a bird's nest. And don't even think about going bareheaded in public. Church rules, enforced since the Council of Constantinople in 869, demand women cover their hair to avoid tempting anyone. You're rolling your eyes, but that's the game. Tools are a slight step up here. Royalty might have silver combs or even early mirrors, polished metal, not glass, but they're still fighting a losing battle. You're watching a courtier try to detangle a princess's hair with a comb so ornate it's practically jewelry, yet it's still snagging on knots. Washing. Maybe once a month, with rosewater if you're fancy, but it's more about scent than cleanliness. You're gagging at the thought of that pigeon-dropping concoction again, wondering how anyone kept a straight face at court. And the smell, oh, the smell. Between unwashed scalps, herbal rinses gone rancid, and the occasional splash of wine used as a cleanser, you're holding your breath. Seasons make it worse. In winter, you're shivering in a stone castle, your scalp dry and flaking under a fur-lined hood. Summer. You're sweating buckets, your hair plastered to your head under a velvet cap. You're starting to get why royalty leans so hard on headgear. A crown doesn't just say, "I'm king." It says, "Don't look too closely at my scalp." You're picturing a queen adjusting her hennin, muttering, "At least no one can see the lice." It's a small win in a world where hair is your enemy. The power dynamic is clear. Hair is a performance, a way to project wealth and control. But it's also a trap. One bad hair day, and the court's whispering about your downfall. You're already dreading the next scene, where peasants make royal hair look like a spa day by comparison. For now, you're just grateful for that crown shielding you from the worst of it. Hats, as always, are the unsung heroes. You're trudging through a muddy medieval village now, the air thick with the stench of livestock and smoke, where peasant hairstyles make royal tangles look like a luxury spa day. You're surrounded by folks in rough wool tunics, their hair a wild, greasy mess, hacked short or tied back with whatever scrap of cloth they can scrounge. Forget the jeweled crowns of the castle. Here, a straw hat is your best defense against a scalp that's practically a wildlife preserve. You're scratching your head just watching them, and trust me, you're not the only one itching. Picture yourself as a peasant, your hands calloused from plowing fields, your hair a matted disaster that hasn't seen water in weeks. Historical records, like the 14th century accounts from English manorial courts, Show peasants were too busy surviving to care about grooming. Bathing. Maybe at a stream, but only if you had time between harvesting and dodging the Lord's tax collector. Your hair is a low priority, and it shows. Most men keep it short, chopped with a knife or shears meant for sheep, because long hair gets caught in tools or yanked in a tavern brawl. Women, if they're lucky, braid their hair tightly to keep it out of the way, but it's still a nest of dirt and lice. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some peasants used stale urine as a hair rinse, believing it could kill lice or at least make their hair less greasy. Yeah, you're gagging, and I don't blame you. No evidence proves it worked, but the ammonia in urine might have had some effect, though it probably just made you smell like a latrine. Historians still argue whether this was a common practice or just a desperate trick in isolated villages. Either way, you're eyeing that straw hat on a nearby farmer with new respect, because it's hiding a multitude of sins. You're noticing the tools, or lack thereof. Combs are crude, carved from wood or bone, with teeth so uneven they tear more than they tame. You're wincing as a woman yanks a splintery comb through her daughter's hair, the kid yelping with every snag. Brushes. Forget it. If you're detangling, it's with your fingers or a stick, and it's a group effort. You see neighbors gathered in doorways, picking through each other's hair like a communal lice-hunting party. It's less about vanity and more about survival. Lice can spread disease, and nobody's got time for that when you're already dodging the plague. The seasons are brutal. In summer, your hair's plastered to your scalp with sweat, a magnet for dust and bugs. Winter's no better. Your scalp's so dry it's snowing flakes under your hood. You're imagining a peasant muttering, "At least the lice freeze in January," and you can't help but chuckle. But it's not all grim. Hair is practical here. Women braid it to keep it out of the cooking fire. Men crop it to avoid looking like a target for bandits. You're watching a farmer's wife twist her hair into a tight bun, secured with a rag, and you're thinking, smart move, less to burn when you're stirring stew. Social rules are simpler but strict. Long hair on men screams outsider or troublemaker, so most stick to a rough crop. Women's hair is a modesty minefield. Loose hair. You're either a maiden or asking for trouble. Married women tuck their hair under a cloth cap or kerchief, partly for church rules, partly to avoid gossip. You're picturing a village busybody whispering, "Her hair's out, bet she's up to no good." The church looms large, with sermons railing against vanity. A 13th-century bishop's decree in France even banned women from showing hair in church, so you're pulling your hood tighter, just in case. Pain is part of the deal. You're wincing at the sight of a man shearing his son's hair with a blade so dull it's practically a club. Precision. Not a thing. The kid's left with a choppy mess, and you're thinking, "Buddy, that's a haircut only a hat can fix." Lice are the real enemy. You're itching just watching a mother comb her kid's hair, pulling out bugs and tossing them into the fire. It's a daily ritual, and nobody's thrilled about it. Some try herbal rinses, nettles or chamomile, but they're more hope than help. You're smelling the faint whiff of boiled herbs, mixed with the ever-present stink of mud and manure. Hair's also a marker of your place. A peasant's short, practical cut says, "I work to live." A noble passing through, with their braided locks or veiled head, screams wealth. You're noticing the gap. Nobles might have lice too, but they've got servants to deal with it. You're stuck with your own two hands and a comb that's seen better days. Festivals are the one break, where you might weave a ribbon into your braid for flair, but it's fleeting. Come Monday, you're back to the grind, your hair a tangled badge of your labor. Hats, as always, save the day. Straw hats, wool caps, even a scrap of linen tied around your head. They're your shield against the sun, the cold, and the judgment of nosy neighbors. You're chuckling at a kid wearing a hood so big it flops over his eyes, but you get it. It's not fashion, it's survival. You're already dreading the next stop, where the church gets its hands on your scalp. For now, you're just glad you've got a hat to hide your own messy locks. Thank goodness for that. You're standing in the shadow of a looming stone church, its bells clanging like a headache you can't shake, and the air smells of incense and damp wool. This is where the medieval church gets its hands on your hair, dictating every strand with the kind of zeal that makes you glad for any hat to hide under. You're surrounded by villagers, their heads bowed, their hair tucked or shaved to meet holy standards. Here, your hairstyle isn't just a style, it's a moral statement, and the church is watching like a hawk. You're feeling the weight of religious rules, where hair is a battleground for piety. Historical records, like the 11th century decrees from the Synod of Rouen, show the church obsessing over hair as a symbol of virtue or sin. Men's hair had to be short, think monk's tonsure or a peasant's rough crop, because long locks were vain or, worse, pagan. Women faced stricter rules. Your hair, if you're a woman, is supposed to be covered, thanks to St. Paul's letters banging on about modesty. Loose hair in church? Might as well wave a flag saying, "I'm a heretic." You're watching a young woman fumble with a linen veil, trying to pin it over her braids before the priest notices. Spoiler, he always notices. Now for the quirky bit. Some monks used to rub their scalps with crushed garlic to purify their tonsures, believing it kept demons at bay. You're smirking at the thought of a monastery smelling like a garlic bread factory, but there's no proof it worked, just another weird medieval fix. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread ritual or just a few overzealous monks in places like 12th century Italy. Either way, you're glad you're not the one shaving your head with a rusty blade and slathering on the garlic paste. Let's talk about the tonsure, because it's the church's ultimate hair power move. If you're a monk, you're kneeling as a razor scrapes a circle on your scalp, leaving a bald crown that's supposed to mimic Christ's halo, or maybe just make you look ridiculous. It's not just aesthetics, it's a vow of humility. You're wincing as the blade nicks skin, and there's no antiseptic in sight. Infection? A real risk, but you're supposed to offer it up to God. Nuns get off slightly easier. No shaving, but their hair's hacked short and hidden under a wimple so tight it's practically a facelift. You're imagining a nun muttering, "At least I don't have to comb this mess," and you can't help but chuckle. The church's grip extends beyond clergy. You're noticing how villagers conform, too. Women's veils aren't just fashion, they're mandatory. A 13th century English sermon railed against women showing even a strand of hair, calling it a sin that could inflame men's lust. You're rolling your eyes, but that's the vibe. Men aren't spared either. Long hair on a layman might get you labeled a rebel or worse, a heretic. You're picturing a priest side-eyeing a guy with shoulder-length locks, whispering, "He's probably a Viking." It's absurd, but it's the medieval mindset. Hair equals morality. Tools here are brutal. Monks use dull razors, sometimes sharpened on a stone, and you're cringing at the thought of one slipping. Combs. Still those jagged bone or wood ones, though clergy might have slightly better ones, maybe etched with a cross for extra holiness. You're watching a novice monk struggle to comb his brother's hair before the tonsure, pulling so hard you're surprised there's any hair left to shave. Washing is minimal. Holy waters for blessing, not shampooing. Some use herbal rinses, like sage, but it's more about smelling pious than actually cleaning anything. You're catching a whiff of damp wool and old herbs, and it's not exactly soothing. Seasons make it rougher. Winter in a drafty monastery means your scalp's freezing after a fresh tonsure, and you're praying the next shave waits till spring. Summer. Sweat trickles into the cuts from a clumsy razor, and you're itching worse than ever. Lice don't care if you're holy, they're equal opportunity pests. You're seeing monks scratch discreetly during prayers, and you're thinking, same brother, same. The church might demand perfection, but your scalp's still a battlefield. Hair's a social code here, too. A tonsure screams, I'm devoted. A veiled head says, I'm obedient. Step out of line, and you're in trouble. You're imagining a woman forgetting her veil and getting a lecture from a priest about eternal damnation over a bad hair day. The church's rules are clear. Control your hair, or you're defying God. You're already dreading the next stop, where knights deal with hair under helmets, but for now, you're just grateful for that veil or hood hiding your own scalp. Hats, once again, are your savior. You're now clanking alongside a knight in a sun-baked training yard, the air heavy with dust and the metallic tang of armor. Your head sweating under a chainmail coif, and you're realizing medieval knightly hairstyles are less about chivalry and more about surviving the helmet hair from hell. Around you, squires polish swords, horses snort, and knights adjust their gear, their scalps a sweaty, matted disaster hidden beneath steel. You're already itching for a hat, or at least a breeze, to save you from this scalp nightmare. Picture yourself as a knight, your hair cropped close to your head, not for style but because anything longer turns your helmet into a torture device. Historical accounts, like those from 12th century chroniclers describing the Crusades, note that knights favored short hair to fit under coifs and helmets without snagging or overheating. Long locks. A recipe for disaster when you're sweating buckets in a metal bucket. You're watching a young knight yank off his helmet, revealing a scalp red from pressure and slick with grime. His hair's so flattened it looks painted on, and you're thinking, buddy, you need more than a squire, you need a miracle. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some knights rubbed their scalps with goose fat, thinking it kept their hair healthy under helmets. You're grimacing at the thought of slathering animal grease on your head, and yeah, it probably just made their helmets smell like a rancid kitchen. No records show it did anything but attract flies, but historians still argue whether this was a battlefield quirk or a weird trend among French knights in the 13th century. Either way, you're grateful for the helmet hiding that greasy mess. You're feeling the weight of the gear. A chainmail coif sits heavy on your head, its links digging into your scalp, matting your hair with every move. Over that, a great helm, basically a steel bucket with slits, traps heat like an oven. You're sweating just standing still, and your hair's a soggy, itchy mess. Knights didn't just wear this for battle. Training meant hours under this stuff, turning your scalp into a swamp. You're watching a knight adjust his coif, muttering curses as his hair catches in the links. It's not glamorous, it's grim. Hygiene. Laughable. You're lucky to splash your face with water from a bucket, let alone wash your hair. On campaign, you're weeks from the nearest stream, and baths are a distant dream. You're smelling the mix of sweat, rust, and that faint goose-fat stench, and it's enough to make you gag. Some knights try rinsing their hair with ale or vinegar when they can, believing it cuts grease, but it's more placebo than solution. You're picturing a knight pouring ale over his head, thinking, at least I'm drunk and greasy, and you can't help but chuckle. Tools are basic. Combs are still those jagged bone or wood ones, though a knight might carry a small one in his kit for prestige more than practicality. You're wincing as a squire combs his master's hair, yanking through knots with no mercy. Razors come out for shaving beards or trimming hair, but they're dull and nick-prone. You're imagining a knight staring at a fresh cut on his scalp, muttering, better than an arrow, I guess. Shaving's rare anyway, Most keep hair short by hacking it with a dagger when it gets too annoying. The seasons are brutal. Summer's a nightmare, your helmet's a furnace, and your scalp's a sweaty, prickly mess. Winter's no kinder. Cold metal freezes your head, and your scalp's so dry it's flaking like snow. Lice love it all. You're scratching just watching a knight rub his head, dislodging a bug or two. Squires often double as delousers, combing through hair during downtime, but it's a losing battle. You're thinking of that village lice-picking party from earlier, except here it's less bonding and more, hurry up before the next drill. Hair's a social signal, too. A knight's close crop says discipline, readiness for battle. Long hair. That's for poets or troublemakers, not men of the sword. You're noticing how squires mimic their masters, sporting the same short cuts, hoping to look the part. Beards are trickier. Some knights grow them for gravitas, others shave to avoid helmet irritation. You're picturing a young knight shaving his scruffy beard, only to end up looking like a kid playing dress-up, and you're smirking. Helmets are the real heroes. Coifs and padded arming caps hide the mess, protect your head, and keep hair out of your eyes. You're watching a knight don his gear, his squire stuffing an arming cap under the helm to cushion it. It's not just practical, it's a lifesaver, covering the fact that his hair hasn't been washed since the last castle feast. You're chuckling at the thought of a knight bowing to a lady, his helm gleaming, while his scalp screams, "Send help!" Chivalry's all about appearances, but the reality's a sweaty itch fest. You're starting to see the knight's burden. Hair's a small part of the job, but it's a constant hassle, one's need to tame to keep you fighting. You're already dreading the next stop, where wild hair gets tangled with witchcraft rumors, but for now, you're just grateful for that helmet shielding your scalp from scrutiny. Hats, or helmets, are, as always, the MVPs. You're creeping through a shadowy medieval village at dusk, the air thick with wood smoke and the faint hum of whispered gossip. Torches flicker, casting eerie light on women with loose, wild hair, and you're suddenly aware of the rumors swirling around them. This is the world where untamed manies could get you branded a witch, and you're clutching your hood tighter, grateful for anything to keep your own locks out of sight. Hair here isn't just a style, it's a dangerous signal, and you're learning fast that a bad hair day could cost you your life. You're picking up on the paranoia. In the 14th and 15th centuries, as witch hunts gained traction across Europe, think the early stirrings of the Malleus Maleficarum in 1486, loose, unbraided hair on women was seen as a red flag. Chronicles from Germany and France describe women with disordered hair being accused of sorcery, as if a messy bun could summon demons. You're watching a woman hurry through the village, her hair escaping her kerchief, and the sidelong glances from neighbors make your stomach churn. She's not casting spells, she's just late for chores, but in this world, appearances are everything. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some villages believed letting your hair down during a storm could ward off lightning. You're chuckling at the image of women standing in the rain, hair flapping like flags, thinking they're saving the crops. No evidence supports this, but it was a folk belief in parts of rural England. Historians still argue whether this was tied to pagan traditions or just desperate superstition in stormy regions. Either way, you're glad you're not out there testing it, especially with thunder rumbling in the distance. You're noticing how hair becomes a trap. The church, as you saw back in that stone cathedral, already demanded women cover their heads for modesty. But now, loose hair isn't just immodest, it's suspicious. You're imagining a priest pointing at a woman's tangled locks, preaching about Eve's temptation, and the crowd nodding like it's obvious. A woman's hair, especially if long and unbound, was thought to hold power, maybe even magic. You're seeing a young girl nervously tucking strands under her cap, hoping to avoid the village busybody's accusations. One wrong move, and she's the talk of the tavern. Let's talk tools, or rather, the lack of them. Most women here are peasants, so it's back to those splintery wooden combs or just their fingers. You're wincing as a mother braids her daughter's hair so tightly it pulls at her scalp, trying to make it respectable. No fancy pins here, just rags or twine to tie it back. Washing. A rare dip in a stream, maybe with a handful of crushed herbs like lavender if they're feeling fancy. But the water's cold, and time's short, so most just live with the grease. You're smelling the mix of dirt, sweat, and faint herbal whiffs, and it's not exactly a perfume ad. The seasons play a cruel role. In summer, your hair's a sweaty, tangled mess, and keeping it neat is a losing battle. Winter's worse, dry, flaky scalps under threadbare hoods, and you're scratching like everyone else. Lice are still the uninvited guests, and you're watching a woman pick through her sister's hair by firelight, muttering about those cursed bugs. Some try folk remedies, like rubbing walnut leaves on their scalps, but it's more myth than medicine. You're picturing a villager swearing by her walnut cure, only to itch worse than ever, and you're stifling a laugh. Hair's a social minefield. Married women keep their hair braided and covered, signaling virtue. Unmarried girls might wear it loose, but only to a point. Too wild, and you're flirting with danger. You're noticing how older women, especially widows, face extra scrutiny. A widow with unbound hair? She's practically begging for a witch trial, or so the neighbors think. You're imagining the gossip. Old Marjorie's hair was out. Bet she's hexing the cows. It's ridiculous, but it's the vibe, and you're keeping your own hair tucked tight. The witch rumors tie hair to power in a way that's both fascinating and terrifying. You're hearing tales of women accused because their hair bewitched men, as if a stray lock could cast a spell. Some even cut their hair short to avoid trouble, but that could backfire. Too short, and you're defying femininity. You're watching a woman hack her hair with a knife, hoping to dodge suspicion, and you're thinking, girl, just wear a bigger hat. But hats are your lifeline here. Kerchiefs, hoods, even a scrap of cloth, they're not just practical, they're protection from prying eyes and wagging tongues. You're starting to feel the weight of this world, where a stray strand could land you in a dungeon. Hair's not just a personal choice, it's a public statement, and the wrong one could burn you. You're already bracing for the next stop, where barber surgeons take haircuts to a whole new level of pain. For now, you're just pulling your hood lower, thankful it's keeping your scalp out of the witch hunt spotlight. Hats, as always, are the real MVPs. You're now wincing in a dimly lit shop, the air sharp with a tang of blood and herbs, where a barber surgeon brandishes a blade that's seen more scalps than a battlefield. This is the medieval world of haircuts doubling as surgery, and you're gripping your hat like a lifeline, grateful for anything to hide the carnage about to unfold on your head. The shop's cluttered with tools that look more like torture devices, and the barber's grin isn't exactly comforting. Hair here isn't just styled, it's hacked, and you're praying you walk out with your ears intact. Picture yourself sitting on a rickety stool, the barber surgeon looming over you with a razor that's probably been used to lance boils and trim beards in the same hour. Historical records, like 13th-century guild regulations from London, show barber surgeons were the go-to for haircuts, shaves, and minor surgeries, often with the same tools. No sterilization, no finesse, just a blade and a prayer. You're watching a man get his hair chopped, the shears snagging on greasy knots, and you're thinking, that's gonna leave a scar. Spoiler, it might. Here's the quirky bit. Some barber surgeons used pig fat mixed with ashes as a styling gel to keep hair in place post-cut. You're gagging at the thought of smearing that on your scalp, And yeah, it probably just made you a walking fire hazard. No evidence it held a style, but historians still argue whether this was a common practice or just a weird fad in places like 14th century Spain. Either way, you're eyeing that straw hat in the corner, ready to cover the greasy aftermath. You're feeling the tension in the room. The barber's tools are a nightmare: rusty shears, dull razors, and a wooden comb so splintered it's practically a weapon. You're wincing as he hacks through a customer's hair, the blade catching on tangles and pulling more than it cuts. Blood's not uncommon. A nick on the scalp is just part of the deal. You're imagining the barber shrugging, "It'll heal," as he wipes the blade on his apron. Hygiene: non-existent. The same basin used for hair rinsing might have been used for bloodletting an hour ago. You're smelling the sour mix of sweat, old blood, and whatever herbal sludge is in that basin, and it's enough to make you dizzy. The process is brutal. If you're a man, you're getting a rough crop, maybe a bowl cut if the barber's feeling fancy. Women rarely sit here. Haircuts for them are a private affair, done at home, but if you're in, you're getting braids trimmed or ends hacked off with zero precision. You're watching a boy squirm as the barber slices his hair into a lopsided mess, and you're thinking, "Kid, you're gonna need a bigger hood." Lice are a constant threat, and the barber might comb through your hair first, flicking bugs onto the floor like it's no big deal. Some claim to use vinegar rinses to kill lice, but it's more hope than science. Seasons make it worse. In summer, the shop's a sweaty oven, and your scalp's itching before the blade even touches it. Winter. The cold makes every nick sting, and the barber's hands are so numb he's even clumsier than usual. You're picturing a customer walking out, scalp stinging, muttering, "At least the lice got a trim too." It's a grim laugh, but you're taking what humor you can get. The barber's not just cutting hair, he's performing, half surgeon, half butcher, and you're praying he's better at the hair part. Hair's a status marker, even here. A peasant gets a quick hack, barely a style. A merchant might pay extra for a neat trim, but it's still a gamble. Nobles. They've got private barbers, leaving this shop to the common folk. You're noticing how the barber adjusts his swagger depending on the customer: a bow for a knight squire, a grunt for a farmer. The shop's a social hub, too, buzzing with gossip about who's been seen with loose hair or a suspicious beard. You're catching snippets of talk about that witchy woman from the village, and you're pulling your hat lower, remembering her fate. The tools tell a story. Shears are heavy, meant for wool as much as hair, and razors are sharpened on a leather strop, if you're lucky. You're watching the barber hone his blade, and it's more menacing than reassuring. Some use a hot cloth to soften the hair, but it's just a rag dipped in lukewarm water, probably reused all day. You're smelling the damp, musty cloth, mixed with the faint whiff of pig fat, and you're ready to bolt. But you stay, because a haircut's not just grooming, it's survival. A tidy head keeps the church off your back and the neighbors from talking. You're starting to see why hats are a godsend. A hood or cap hides the barber's hack job, covers the nicks, and keeps the lice out of sight. You're chuckling at a man leaving the shop, his new cut so uneven it looks like a dog chewed it, but his cap's already on, saving his dignity. You're already dreading the next stop, where braids carry secrets of status and rebellion, but for now, you're just thankful for that hat shielding your scalp from the barber's blade. Hats, as always, are the real heroes. You're weaving through a bustling medieval market, the air alive with the chatter of traders and the clatter of carts, where braids aren't just hairstyles. They're a coded language shouting your status, marital state, or even a hint of defiance. You're surrounded by women with hair twisted into intricate patterns, some tucked under veils, others boldly bare, and you're realizing a single plait could say more than words. Your own hair's safely hidden under a cap, and you're grateful for it, because in this world, a braid gone wrong could spark a scandal. Imagine yourself dodging merchants hawking wool and spices, your eyes drawn to the women's hair, some with tight, orderly braids, others with looser, rebellious ones. Historical records, like 14th-century sumptuary laws in England, show that braids were a big deal, signaling everything from wealth to virtue. A noblewoman's double braid, pinned with silk, screams, "I've got money." A peasant's single, ragged plait says, "I'm just trying to survive." You're watching a young woman weave a ribbon into her braid, her fingers quick but nervous, like she's hoping no one calls her out for flaunting a bit of flair. Here's the quirky tidbit. In some regions, like parts of 13th century Germany, women braided charms, like tiny bones or beads, into their hair for luck or love spells. You're smirking at the thought of a suitor tripping over himself because of a magical braid, but there's no proof it worked. Historians still argue whether these charms were common or just a romanticized tale in courtly poetry. Either way, you're glad your cap's keeping your own hair out of the charm-weaving game. You're noticing the social rules woven into every strand. Married women keep their braids tight, often hidden under a wimple or coif, signaling respectability. Unmarried girls can get away with looser, single braids, maybe with a ribbon if they're feeling bold, but too much flair draws whispers. You're imagining a village gossip hissing, "Her braid's too fancy, bet she's after trouble." Rebels, though, push the limits. You're spotting a woman with a loose, flowing braid, no veil in sight, and the market's buzzing with judgment. She's either brave or begging for a sermon, and you're not sure which. Tools are simple but crucial. Most women use their fingers to braid, maybe a bone comb to smooth the tangles first. You're wincing as a mother braids her daughter's hair, yanking through knots with a comb that's more splinters than teeth. Pins, if you've got them, are wood or bone, sometimes metal for the wealthy, but they're prone to slipping. You're watching a merchant's wife struggle to secure her braid under a linen cap, cursing as a pin falls into the dirt. Washing's a rare treat, maybe a rinse with chamomile or rosemary water, but it's more about scent than cleanliness. You're catching a faint herbal whiff, drowned out by the market's mix of sweat and fish. Seasons mess with the braid game. Summer's heat makes your scalp a sweaty mess, and braids loosen faster than you can pin them. Winter's dry air turns hair brittle, snapping strands as you try to plait. Lice, as always, are the enemy. You're seeing women comb each other's hair in the market shade, flicking bugs away like it's just another Tuesday. Some swear by braiding in garlic juice to repel lice, but it just leaves you smelling like a stew. You're chuckling at the thought of a suitor leaning in for a kiss, only to get a whiff of garlic braid, romance killer, for sure. Braids carry power beyond looks. A noblewoman's intricate plaits, maybe woven with gold thread, signal wealth and time. Servants spent hours on those. A peasant's quick braid, tied with twine, says she's got fields to tend. But defiance, that's where it gets spicy. You're hearing whispers of women braiding their hair in secret patterns to signal rebellion, maybe a loose plait to mock the church's modesty rules. In some towns, a single braid worn openly by a married woman could spark rumors of infidelity. You're picturing a priest scolding a woman for her sinful braid, and you're thinking, it's just hair, man. The market's a stage for this braid code. You're noticing how women size each other up, judging plaits like they're reading a book. A tight, veiled braid? She's a proper wife. A loose, ribboned one? She's either young or trouble. You're watching a girl weave a flower into her braid for a festival, and the crowd split, half admire, half mutter about vanity. It's a tightrope, and every strand counts. You're already dreading the next stop, where hair dye takes things to a whole new level of gross. But for now, you're just glad your cap's hiding your own hair from the market's prying eyes. Hats, as always, are the unsung heroes. You're stumbling through a medieval apothecary stall, the air heavy with the stench of boiled herbs and something far worse. Think urine and lead, because that's the grim reality of hair dye in this era. You're surrounded by jars of questionable sludge, and the apothecary's grin as he mixes a color potion makes you clutch your hat tighter, grateful for anything to hide the disasters brewing here. Hair dyeing isn't just vanity, it's a risky, smelly gamble, and you're praying you never have to try it. Imagine yourself hovering near a woman who's decided to refresh her hair color, her scalp already a patchwork of grease and itch. Historical records, like 14th century recipe books from Italy, describe hair dyes made from lead oxide, walnut shells, and, yes, urine, used to achieve anything from blonde to black. The goal? To mimic the golden locks of a noble or darken gray strands to fake youth. You're watching her wince as the apothecary slathers a foul paste on her hair, the fumes making your eyes water. Spoiler: this isn't going to end well. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some recipes called for bat blood mixed with vinegar to enhance red hues. You're gagging at the thought of rubbing that into your scalp, and no, there's no evidence it worked, just a lot of dead bats and hopeful fools. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or just an alchemist's fever dream in places like 15th century France. Either way, you're thanking your lucky stars for that hood keeping your own hair far from this madness. You're noticing the process is as dangerous as it is gross. Lead-based dyes, common for darkening hair, could poison you over time, seeping into your skin and causing everything from tremors to tooth loss. You're imagining a noblewoman admiring her new black locks, unaware she's signing up for a slow, toxic death. Blonde dyes were no better. Mixtures of lye and urine could burn your scalp raw. You're watching a woman rinse her hair in a bucket of this stuff, her face screwed up in pain, and you're thinking, "Lady, just embrace the gray." The apothecary's not helping, promising eternal youth, while stirring a pot that smells like a latrine. Tools are crude. No fancy brushes here, just a stick or your fingers to smear the dye. Combs, still those splintery bone ones, are used to work the mixture through, but they snag and tear. You're wincing as a woman's hair gets caught, pulling out clumps along with the comb. Rinsing. Good luck. You're dunking your head in a barrel of murky water, maybe with a splash of vinegar to set the color, but it's more about masking the smell than sealing the dye. You're catching a whiff of ammonia and burnt herbs, and it's enough to make you dizzy. Seasons make it worse. Summer's heat turns the dye into a sticky, sweaty mess, running down your neck and staining your clothes. Winter's cold makes the mixtures clump, and your scalp's already dry and cracking before the dye even touches it. Lice, as always, love the chaos. You're seeing a woman scratch furiously post-dye, probably wondering if the lice are enjoying the new color. Some try to fend them off with rosemary rinses, but it's a losing battle. You're chuckling at the thought of a louse sporting a tiny blonde streak, but it's a grim kind of humor. Hair dye's a status game, too. Only the wealthy can afford these risky concoctions, so a dyed head screams, "I've got coin." Noblewomen aim for golden blonde to mimic courtly ideals, while merchants might go for a solid brown to look respectable. Peasants. They're stuck with their natural color, unless they're desperate enough to try a homemade brew. You're noticing how the market crowd eyes a dyed head, half awe, half suspicion. A bad dye job, though, is a social death sentence. You're picturing a woman with splotchy, greenish hair, the crowd whispering, "She tried too hard." Ouch. The risks aren't just cosmetic. You're hearing whispers of women losing hair, or worse, from botched dyes. Lead poisoning was a silent killer, and live burns could leave scars. Yet vanity pushes people to try, hoping to stand out in a world where appearance is power. You're watching a young girl beg for a dye to look like a lady, and the apothecary's already mixing a batch that'll probably turn her hair orange. You're thinking, kid, stick to a hat. Hats, as always, are the real saviors. A veil or cap hides a dye disaster, covers the burns, and keeps the gossip at bay. You're chuckling at a merchant's wife adjusting her wimple, hiding a botched blonde job that's more yellow than gold. You're already dreading the next stop, where festival hair takes extravagance to new heights, but for now, you're just grateful for that cap shielding your scalp from the apothecary's toxic brews. Hats, once again, are the MVPs. You're swept into the vibrant chaos of a medieval festival, where the air hums with lute music, roasted meat, and the laughter of a crowd decked out in their finest, or wildest, hair. This is the world of hair sculptures, towering, bejeweled, and downright bizarre, making you grateful for any hat to dodge the pressure of competing with these scalp masterpieces. You're jostling through a throng of nobles, peasants, and jesters, their heads adorned with creations that defy gravity and good sense, and you're realizing hair here is less about grooming and more about stealing the show. Picture yourself at a tournament or harvest feast, circa 14th century England, where hair becomes a canvas for extravagance. Historical accounts, like those from the court of Edward III, describe noblewomen sporting hair piled high with gold nets and pearls, shaped into cones or hearts for maximum drama. You're gawking at a lady whose hair is sculpted into a double-horned tower, studded with gems, and you're thinking, how does she even walk? Peasants get in on the fun too, weaving flowers or ribbons into braids for a rare chance to shine. It's a spectacle, but beneath the flair, everyone's still itching from the usual lice and grime. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some noblemen at festivals glued fake hairpieces, made from horsehair or wool, to their heads for extra volume, like medieval toupees. You're snickering at the thought of a lord's hair blowing off in a joust, revealing a sweaty scalp. No records prove how common this was, but historians still argue whether it was a trend in 15th century France or just a courtly prank gone viral. Either way, you're glad your cap's keeping you out of the fake hair game. You're noticing the effort behind these looks. Noblewomen's hair sculptures take hours. Servants pin, braid, and pad with linen or horsehair to build those towering shapes. You're watching a lady's maid balance a wire frame on her mistress's head, weaving hair around it like she's constructing a cathedral. It's heavy, hot, and wobbly, but the result screams wealth. Men aren't spared. Knights might sport curled locks or braided strands for flair, though it's a pain under helmets. You're imagining a knight adjusting his festive curls, muttering, "This better impress the ladies," and you can't help but chuckle. Tools are pushed to their limits. Bone combs smooth the base, but pins, metal for the rich, wood for the rest, are the real MVPs, holding these sculptures together. You're wincing as a maid jams a pin into a noblewoman's scalp, drawing a yelp but no sympathy. Wax or animal fat sometimes sets the style, but it melts in summer heat, leaving a greasy trail. You're smelling the mix of fat, floral oils, and sweat, and it's a weirdly festive stench. Washing. Forget it. These styles last days, maybe weeks, with no rinse in sight. Lice love the extra real estate, and you're itching just thinking about it. Seasons play havoc. Summer festivals mean sweat-loosening braids and wilting flowers woven into hair. Winter feasts are cozier but dry, making hair brittle and prone to snapping under heavy pins. You're picturing a noblewoman's heart-shaped hairdo collapsing mid-dance, the crowd whispering, "Her hair's cursed." It's a laugh, but the pressure's real. bad hair at a festival could tank your reputation. Peasants dodge some of this. Their simpler braids with daisies or ivy are easier to manage. You're seeing a girl twirl with a flower crown, carefree, and you're jealous of her low-stakes style. Hair's a social billboard here. Nobles' towering dose scream, "I'm above you." Peasants' ribbons say, "I'm celebrating too." But it's a hierarchy. Only the elite can afford gold nets or silk veils, while commoners make do with cloth scraps. You're noticing how the crowd parts for a lady with a gem-studded hair tower, while a peasant's braided flowers barely get a glance. Rebellion sneaks in, though. Some young women weave bright ribbons against church rules, daring the priests to complain during a feast. You're smirking at a girl with a defiant red ribbon, thinking, "Go for it, but watch out for the sermon." The festival's a rare chance to flex creativity, but it's not all fun. Heavy hairdos cause headaches, and one wrong move sends pins flying. You're watching a noblewoman adjust her wobbling hair tower, her face a mix of pride and pain. Tournaments add pressure. Knights' ladies compete to outshine each other, their hair a weapon in the courtly game. You're chuckling at a knight bowing to a lady, his eyes on her hair, probably wondering how it stays up. Spoiler, it's a lot of pins and prayer. Hats, or their fancy cousins, save the day. Veils, cauls, and jeweled nets aren't just style. They hide the greasy roots and hold the chaos together. You're grateful for the hood on your own head, sparing you the need to compete with these scalp skyscrapers. You're already dreading the next stop, where monks face the razor's wrath, but for now, you're just soaking in the festival's wild hair parade, thankful your cap's keeping you low-key. Hats, as always, are the real heroes. You're kneeling in a chilly stone monastery, the air thick with the scent of damp walls and flickering tallow candles, where monks face the razor in a ritual that's equal parts devotion and discomfort. This is the world of monastic shaves, where your scalp is a canvas for humility, and you're clutching your hood, grateful for anything to hide the raw, scraped mess left behind. The sound of a blade scraping skin echoes, and you're realizing a monk's tonsure isn't just a hairstyle, it's a test of endurance. Picture yourself as a novice, head bowed, while a senior monk hovers with a razor that looks more suited to slaughtering sheep than shaving scalps. Historical records, like 12th century monastic rules from Cluny, describe the tonsure as a sacred act, cutting a bald circle or crown to symbolize devotion to God and rejection of vanity. You're watching a monk grimace as the blade scratches his scalp, leaving it red and stinging. The tonsure's shape varies. Some monasteries shave just a patch, others the whole crown, but it's always a stark badge of faith. Spoiler, it's also a magnet for sunburn and lice. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some monks believed rubbing their freshly shaved scalps with nettle juice would purify the skin and ward off evil spirits. You're chuckling at the thought of a monastery full of stinging, red-headed monks, but there's no proof it did anything but hurt. Historians still argue whether this was a common practice or just a peculiar tradition in remote 13th century English abbeys. Either way, you're glad your hood's sparing you from that stinging ritual. You're feeling the weight of the process. Shaving's done every few weeks, often by a fellow monk with shaky hands and a dull blade. You're wincing as the razor nicks a novice's scalp, a trickle of blood mixing with the cold water splashed on to clean it. No soap, no antiseptic, just a rag and a prayer to avoid infection. You're imagining a monk muttering, "Offer it up to God," as he dabs at a cut, and you're thinking, yeah, easier said than done. The tonsure's not just physical, it's a public vow. A shaved head screams, "I'm God's servant," but it also makes you a target for mockery outside the monastery walls. Tools are brutal. Razors are crude, often just sharpened knives, honed on a stone if you're lucky. You're watching a monk sharpen his blade, the grinding sound setting your teeth on edge. Combs, when used, are the same splintery bone ones you've seen before, barely smoothing the hair before it's scraped off. Some monasteries use a bowl to guide the cut, like a medieval barber's trick, but precision's a fantasy. You're picturing a monk with a lopsided tonsure, looking like a kid's bad art project, and you're stifling a laugh. Seasons make it rougher. Winter's freezing stone floors turn every shave into a shivering ordeal, and your scalp's raw and flaky before the blade even touches it. Summer's no better. Sweat stings the fresh cuts, and the sun burns your bald patch red. Lice, of course, don't respect holy vows. You're seeing a monk scratch his tonsure discreetly during prayers, and you're thinking, "Brother, I feel you." Some try herbal rinses, like sage or mint, to soothe the itch, but it's more about faith than results. You're smelling the faint whiff of herbs, undercut by the monastery's ever-present damp mold vibe. The tonsure's a social marker, too. It sets monks apart from laymen, whose short crops or long locks signal worldly concerns. You're noticing how villagers eye a monk's shaved head with a mix of awe and pity, whispering about those holy baldies. Nuns face a different fate, hair cropped short, hidden under tight wimples, no shaving required but no less humbling. You're imagining a nun adjusting her veil, grateful it hides her uneven chop, and you're nodding in solidarity. The church's rules are ironclad. Your hair, or lack of it, proves your devotion. Shame's part of the deal. A botched tonsure, too patchy or bloody, could spark gossip among the brothers. You're hearing whispers about a novice whose shave went so wrong he looks like he lost a fight with a scythe. It's a small humiliation, but in a monastery, where pride's a sin, it stings. Outside, townsfolk might jeer at a monk's bald crown, calling it a devil's target. You're chuckling at the thought of a monk brushing off the taunts, but deep down, you know it's a daily test of humility. Hats, or hoods, are your only reprieve. Monks wear cowls to shield their scalps from cold, sun, or mockery, and you're grateful for the course while hiding your own head. You're watching a monk pull his hood low, maybe to cover a bad shave, and you're thinking, smart move. You're already dreading the next stop, where kids' hair becomes a lice-filled battlefield, but for now, you're just thankful for that hood sparing your scalp from the razor's wrath. Hats, as always, are the real saviors. You're crouching in a smoky medieval hovel, the air thick with the scent of straw and stew, where children's hair is a tangled, lice-ridden mess that makes you itch just looking at it. The firelight flickers on grubby faces, their scalps a battlefield of bugs and bad haircuts, and you're pulling your hood tighter, grateful for anything to shield you from this chaos. Here, a kid's hairstyle isn't about cute braids or bowl cuts. It's about survival, and you're learning fast that a sheer happy parent with a dull blade is the least of their worries. Picture yourself watching a mother wrestle her squirming son, her hands gripping a knife to hack his hair into something manageable. Historical records, like 14th century household accounts from rural England, show kids' hair was kept short, often chopped at home with whatever tool was handy, to reduce lice and keep it out of their eyes while they worked fields or fetched water. You're seeing a girl with a jagged crop, her scalp dotted with red from a too-close cut, and you're thinking, "Kid, you're lucky you still have ears." Long hair's a luxury for the rich. Here, it's just another thing to itch. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some parents smeared their kids' scalps with onion juice, believing it repelled lice or made hair grow stronger. You're wrinkling your nose at the thought of a village full of onion-scented kids, and no, there's no proof it worked, just a lot of teary eyes and smelly heads. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread folk remedy or a desperate trick in places like 13th century Scotland. Either way, you're glad your hood's keeping you far from that pungent paste. You're noticing the daily grind. Kids' hair is a magnet for dirt, sweat, and bugs, especially since they're running through mud, climbing trees, or dodging chores. Washing. A rare dip in a stream, maybe with a handful of soapwort if the family's got it, but it's more splash than scrub. You're watching a mother rinse her daughter's hair in a bucket, the water already brown from the last kid, and you're gagging at the thought. Lice are the real enemy. You're seeing a family huddle by the fire, combing each other's hair with a splintery wooden comb, picking out bugs and tossing them into the flames like it's a grim game. It's bonding, sure, but it's also exhausting. Tools are rough. Combs are bone or wood, their teeth uneven and prone to snapping. You're wincing as a father yanks a comb through his son's knots, the kid yelping with every tug. Shears or knives double as hair-cutting tools, and precision's a fantasy. You're imagining a parent eyeing their kid's head, muttering, "Close enough," as they leave a choppy mess that looks like it was done blindfolded. Some try to soften the hair with a dab of animal fat, but it just attracts more dirt. You're smelling the faint grease, mixed with smoke and unwashed wool, and it's not exactly cozy. Seasons make it worse. Summer's heat turns kids' scalps into sweaty lice havens, and their hair's plastered to their foreheads during play. Winter's dry air leaves scalps flaking, and the cold makes every comb snag sting. You're picturing a kid scratching under a too-big hood, muttering, "Why me?" and you're chuckling at the universal misery. Parents might braid girls' hair to keep it neat, but boys get the short end, literally. A quick shear keeps their hair practical, but it's a battle against bugs and grime either way. Hair's a social signal, even for kids. Short, ragged cuts scream, "peasant child," while a noble kid might sport slightly neater braids or curls, thanks to a servant's comb. You're noticing how village kids eye a merchant's daughter with a ribbon braid, half jealous, half mocking. Gender matters too. Girls' hair might be left longer for future braiding, but it's a lice magnet. Boys' crops are meant to toughen them up, like mini knights. You're imagining a boy sulking after a fresh cut, his friends teasing his lopsided head, and you're thinking, "Hang in there, little dude." The lice fight never ends. Some parents swear by herbal rinses, mint or lavender, but it's more hope than cure. You're watching a mother rub her kid's scalp with a foul-smelling herb paste, the kid squirming and whining. It's a ritual born of desperation, and you're itching in sympathy. Worse, long hair on a kid could draw suspicion. Remember those witch rumors? A girl with tangled, unbound hair might get whispers of troublemaker or worse. You're seeing a mother braid her daughter's hair tightly, muttering about keeping the neighbors quiet, and you're nodding along. Hats are the only escape. Wool caps, straw hats, or even a scrap of cloth keep the mess hidden and the lice at bay, sort of. You're chuckling at a kid wearing a hood so big it flops over his eyes, but you get it. It's his shield against the world's judgment and those relentless bugs. You're already dreading the next stop, where exotic hair trends roll in with merchants, but for now, you're just grateful for that hood sparing your scalp from the family shear and itch routine. Hats, as always, are the real MVPs. You're weaving through a bustling medieval port, the air salty with sea spray and buzzing with the shouts of merchants unloading exotic goods from far-off lands. This is where trade routes like the Silk Road bring new hair trends, and you're wide-eyed at the strange styles, braids with beads, shaved patterns, and colors you didn't think hair could be. You're tugging your cap lower, grateful for its plain cover, because these imported looks are bold, pricey, and way too much for your itchy scalp to handle. Picture yourself dodging crates of spices and silk, your eyes locked on a merchant's wife sporting a hairstyle that screams, "I've seen Damascus." Historical records, like 13th-century trade logs from Venice, show how goods from Asia, Africa, and the Middle East brought not just fabrics but fashion, including hair trends. Wealthy Europeans aped styles from Byzantine courts or Moorish Spain. Think intricate braids with gold beads or henna-dyed reds. You're watching a noblewoman strut past, her hair woven with silk threads from Persia, and you're thinking, that's a month's wages on her head. Peasants, meanwhile, gawk and stick to their greasy plates. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some traders claimed camel milk rinses, picked up in the Levant, made hair shinier than any local herb. You're smirking at the thought of a lord's wife dousing her locks in sour milk, hoping for a Byzantine glow, only to smell like a desert caravan. No proof it worked, but historians still argue whether this was a real trend or just merchants hyping their wares in 14th-century Italian ports. Either way, you're glad your cap's keeping you out of the camel milk experiment. You're noticing the cultural mashup. Byzantine-inspired braids, tight and studded with beads, are a hit among the elite, but they take hours and a small fortune in accessories. You're watching a maid struggle to weave tiny pearls into her lady's hair, her fingers slipping as the noblewoman snaps at her to hurry. Moorish styles, like henna-dyed hair or shaved side patterns, pop up among daring merchant sons, but they draw church glares, too pagan for the local priest. You're imagining a sermon railing against heathen locks, and you're chuckling at the drama over a few beads. Tools get fancier here. The wealthy might use imported ivory combs, smoother than the usual bone ones, but still a pain on knots. You're wincing as a servant combs a trader's daughter's hair, the girl yelping with every snag. Metal pins from the East, sometimes etched with patterns, hold these styles together, but they're pricey and prone to rust. Henna dyeing, a North African import, needs bowls and brushes, crude wooden ones, but still a step up from finger smearing. You're smelling the earthy tang of henna, mixed with the port's fishy stench, and it's a weirdly exotic vibe. Seasons mess with the trends. Summer's humidity frizzes those tight braids, and henna runs in the heat, staining necks red. Winter's dry air cracks dyed hair, and those fancy pins get cold enough to sting your scalp. Lice, of course, don't care about your imported style. You're seeing a merchant scratch under his turban, muttering about port bugs, and you're itching in solidarity. Some try Eastern remedies, like cedar oil rinses, but they're more about scent than pest control. You're picturing a trader swearing by his oil, only to find lice partying in his braids, and you're stifling a laugh. These styles are a status flex. A noble's beaded braids or hennaed locks scream, "I trade with the world." A peasant's plain crop says, "I'm stuck here." You're noticing how dockworkers eye the elite's hair, half jealous, half mocking. But it's not all glamour. New styles spark suspicion. A woman with Moorish braids might get whispers of witch or foreigner, echoing those village rumors you heard. You're watching a trader's wife adjust her veil, hiding her hennaed hair from a priest's stare, and you're thinking, smart move. The port's a trendsetter, but it's risky. Exotic styles need upkeep, and one bad day, say, a bead falling out mid-market, could tank your rep. You're chuckling at a young man with a half-shaved head, his Saracen style already growing out into a patchy mess. Merchants push these looks, selling beads or dyes at a markup, but most locals stick to what they know. You're seeing a girl weave a cheap glass bead into her braid, dreaming of Constantinople, and you're rooting for her small rebellion. Hats, or their fancier cousins, save the day. Turbans, veils, or jeweled cauls hide the upkeep disasters and keep the church off your back. You're grateful for your plain cap, sparing you the cost and drama of these imported looks. You're already dreading the next stop, where laws clamp down on hair freedom, but for now, you're just soaking in the port's wild hair parade, thankful your hood's keeping you under the radar. Hats, as always, are the real MVPs. You're fuming in a crowded medieval town square, the air thick with the chatter of merchants and the clink of coins, where sumptuary laws dictate your hairstyle like a nosy overlord, stripping away any chance to express yourself. You're surrounded by folks whose hair, braided, cropped, or veiled, screams their place in the pecking order, and you're clutching your cap, grateful it hides your scalp from the law's prying eyes. Here, a stray ribbon or fancy braid could land you a fine, and you're realizing hair isn't just personal, it's political. Imagine yourself dodging the town bailiff, who's scanning heads for illegal flair. Historical records, like 14th-century sumptuary laws in France and England, show rulers obsessed with controlling appearances to reinforce class lines. Laws in places like Florence banned peasants from wearing noble-style braids or gold hairpins, reserving those for the elite. You're watching a merchant's wife nervously tuck a silk ribbon under her veil, hoping no one rats her out for dressing above her station. Nobles, meanwhile, flaunt towering hairdos with impunity, their wealth a legal shield. You're thinking, talk about a bad hair day with fines attached. Here's the quirky tidbit. In some towns, like 15th-century Nuremberg, officials allegedly measured braid length to enforce laws. Too long, and you were deemed vain or worse. You're chuckling at the thought of a bailiff with a ruler chasing a woman's plate, but there's no solid proof this was widespread. Historians still argue whether such measures were real or just exaggerated in satirical chronicles. Either way, you're glad your cap's keeping your own hair out of the law's measuring stick. You're noticing the frustration in the air. Peasants are stuck with plain, short crops or simple braids, tied with cloth scraps to avoid trouble. Women, especially, face scrutiny. Sumptuary laws often targeted their veils or pins, demanding modesty and class compliance. You're seeing a young girl hide a cheap bead in her braid, her eyes darting for enforcers. Nobles, though, get a pass for their jeweled nets or silk-wrapped braids, because money talks louder than law. You're imagining a peasant muttering, "Same lice, different rules," and you're nodding along. Tools haven't changed much. Still those splintery bone combs and wooden pins, but the stakes are higher. You're wincing as a woman combs her hair into a law-approved bun, the comb snagging on knots from days without washing. Pins are risky. A shiny one could scream, "Too fancy," and draw a fine. Washing's a low priority. Maybe a quick rinse with nettle water, but it's more about dodging lice than looking legal. You're smelling the faint herbal tang, mixed with the square stench of mud and market fish, and it's a grim reminder of the daily grind. Seasons add to the hassle. Summer's heat makes tight, modest braids a sweaty nightmare, and loose strands could get you noticed. Winter's dry air snaps hair, making neat styles harder to maintain, especially when your hood's your only defense. Lice, as always, ignore the law. You're watching a man scratch under his cap, probably cursing the rules that keep him from a fancier comb. Some try folk remedies, like rubbing mint leaves on their scalps, but it's a faint hope against the itch. You're picturing a bailiff sniffing out a vain, mint-scented head, and you're stifling a laugh. Hair's a battleground for identity. A peasant's plain crop says, "I know my place." A noble's ornate braid screams, "I'm untouchable." But rebellion simmers. You're hearing whispers of women weaving forbidden ribbons into their hair at night, defying the law in secret. In some towns, a too bold braid could spark accusations of moral decay, or worse, tie back to those which rumors you overheard. You're watching a woman adjust her kerchief, hiding a single illicit bead, and you're rooting for her quiet revolt. The laws aren't just about control, they're about shame. A public fine for a fancy braid could ruin your reputation, marking you as uppity or sinful. You're imagining the town crier announcing a woman's hair crime, the crowd snickering as she hides her face. It's a power play. keeping everyone in line with fear of judgment. Even men aren't spared. Long hair on a commoner might get you labeled a troublemaker. You're seeing a young man crop his locks shorter than he'd like, muttering about stupid rules, and you feel his pain. Hats are your only refuge. Caps, hoods, or plain veils hide your hair from the bailiff's glare and the neighbor's gossip. You're chuckling at a man pulling his hood low, probably concealing a braid he couldn't resist. You're already dreading the final stop, where hats become the ultimate hair savior, but for now, you're just thankful for that cap keeping your scalp out of the law's clutches. Hats, as always, are the real heroes. You're standing in the heart of a medieval town, the air buzzing with the clatter of carts and the chatter of a crowd, where hats reign supreme as the ultimate saviors of your hair's many sins. From straw hoods to jeweled headdresses, these head coverings are your shield against greasy locks, lice, and the judgmental stares of neighbors. You're tugging your own cap lower, breathing a sigh of relief, because in this world, a hat isn't just fashion, it's your best defense against a scalp that's seen better days. Picture yourself weaving through a market, where every head is topped with something. Peasants in rough wool caps, nobles in velvet hennons, and monks in cowls that scream humility. Historical records, like 14th-century wardrobe accounts from the English court, show hats were essential, not just for style but for practicality, hiding the mess of unwashed, lice-ridden hair. You're watching a merchant adjust his chaperone, a fancy rolled hat that covers his greasy crop, and you're thinking, smart move, buddy. Hats don't just conceal, they elevate, turning a bad hair day into a statement of status or survival. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some townsfolk stuff their hats with lavender or dried herbs, believing it repelled lice or masked the smell of their unwashed scalps. You're smirking at the thought of a noblewoman's headdress wafting lavender while hiding a lice party, but there's no proof it worked. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread trick or just a hopeful fad in places like 15th-century Flanders. Either way, you're grateful your cap's plain and herb-free, keeping things simple. You're noticing how hats define the crowd. Peasants wear straw hats or linen coifs, practical for shielding sun or rain while hiding their matted hair. Noblewomen sport towering hennons or silk cauls, their intricate designs distracting from the tangles beneath. Men, from knights to laborers, rely on hoods or felt caps to keep their short crops out of sight. You're watching a knight squire adjust a padded arming cap, probably thankful it covers his sweaty, helmet-flattened hair. It's a universal truth. No matter your rank, your scalp's a mess, and a hat's your savior. Tools for hat wearing are minimal but crucial. Pins, wood for the poor, metal for the rich, secure veils or headdresses, though they slip and stab your scalp. You're wincing as a woman jams a pin into her wimple, muttering curses as it grazes her skin. Some hats, like the noble's hennon, need wire frames or padding to stay upright, adding weight but hiding the chaos. Washing. Still a rare luxury. You're smelling the faint lavender from a nearby cap, but it's fighting a losing battle against the market's mix of sweat, mud, and fish. Hats don't clean your hair, they just make you forget it's there. Seasons amplify the hat's importance. Summer's heat turns your scalp into a sweaty swamp, and a straw hat's your only relief from the sun and the itch. Winter's cold makes wool hoods a must, protecting your flaky scalp from frost. Lice, of course, don't care about your headgear. You're seeing a man scratch under his cap, probably cursing the bugs that snuck past his lavender stash. Some try stuffing their hats with mint leaves, but it's more about hope than results. You're chuckling at the thought of a louse lounging in a minty hat, living its best life. Hats are a social code, too. A peasant's plain coif says, "I'm practical." A noble's jeweled headdress screams, "I'm untouchable." You're noticing how the crowd sizes each other up by headgear. Nobles get deference, while a peasant's tattered hood draws shrugs. But hats also level the playing field. A good cap hides the same greasy scalp whether you're a lord or a laborer. You're imagining a knight and a farmer standing side by side, their hats concealing identical lice woes, and you're smirking at the irony. The hat's power goes beyond looks. It's a shield from gossip, sumptuary laws, and even those witchy rumors you heard back in the village. A woman with a loose braid can slip under a veil and dodge a priest's glare. A man with a botched barber-surgeon cut can pull on a hood and avoid the laughs. You're watching a young girl adjust her kerchief, hiding a forbidden ribbon, and you're rooting for her stealth. Hats are freedom, letting you move through this judgmental world without your scalp betraying you. As you linger in the market, you're feeling the weight of this hair-obsessed era. From royal crowns to peasant hoods, everyone's fighting the same battle against grime and bugs, and hats are the universal fix. You're grateful for your own cap, a simple barrier against the chaos of medieval hair. You're thinking back to the knight's sweaty helmets, the monk's raw tonsures, and those wild festival hair towers. Hats saved them all. And now, as the sun dips low, casting long shadows over the cobblestones, you're ready to let this journey fade. Wind down. The market's noise softens, the crowd thinning as torches flicker out, and you're standing still, your cap a quiet comfort on your head. The day's bustle fades, leaving only the gentle creak of a cart and the distant hum of a lullaby from a nearby hovel. Your shoulders relax, the itch of imagined lice easing as you breathe in the cool evening air. Hair, with all its rules and risks, feels less daunting now, tucked safely under your hood. You're picturing a peasant girl, her braid hidden, slipping home to a warm fire, a knight, his helmet off, resting under a wool cap, a monk, his tonsure covered, whispering prayers in the dark. They're all at peace, their scalps forgotten, their hats a final shield. Let the day's worries slip away, like a veil falling softly to the ground. Close your eyes, let the world blur, and drift into the quiet of the night. Sleep well.